So I'm going to jump right in, and as you all know, I interned with NARAL Pro-Choice New York this summer, doing a lot of work around abortion rights. And so abortion is not a particularly easy issue to talk about. It's not something that is part of polite conversation, and it's not necessarily something families talk about around the dinner table. And that's because abortion is one of the most politically divisive issues of our century. Within the past year alone, there have been more than 300 anti-choice legislation proposed in states throughout the country. And so it's a really difficult issue to sort of talk about, whether it's on a personal or public level. And I used to be very apologetic when people asked me what I fought for. Because it's so controversial, it's kind of hard to just enter into a conversation with a person and be like, oh yeah, I fight for abortion rights. Because it seems like within those next 2 or 3 minutes, the person you're speaking to will either be your best friend or your worst enemy, depending on where they fall on this pro-choice spectrum. And so when I used to talk about what I fought for and my passions, I was a little bit reserved about it. And I was a little bit apologetic about it because it's so controversial. But this summer when I was at NARAL Pro-Choice New York, I met a woman who introduced me to a different way of thinking about the work I do. And her name was Jasmine Burnett, and I sort of want to talk a bit about her. But to give a little bit of context, so I interned in Manhattan in New York City. And at first when I went there, I was really concerned. I knew that the other fellows were going different places throughout the world, and I was the only one staying in the country. And I at first considered that would be a hindrance to developing a new mindset. How can I stay in this country, an hour away from where I grew up in New Jersey, and have this life-changing experience where I completely shift the way I think about things. But as I learned throughout my time there, throughout my 8 weeks, and as some of my fellow fellows will talk about, having a paradigm shift isn't so much about where you are, it's about the people you meet. And that really rang true to me when I was in New York City this summer. And so every 2 weeks at NARAL, the staff would bring in a speaker for a brown bag lunch workshop. Sometimes they were political activists and sometimes they were candidates for office, and they would sort of sit all the interns down and just sort of engage with us around these issues and have a conversation. And so that's how I met Jasmine. So to give you a snapshot of who Jasmine Burnett is, she is a 34-year-old queer black feminist, and she has worked in so many different organizations. I'll just give you a couple. She's a campus organizer for Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She's the founding member of Organized Roots, which is a human rights firm, and a bunch of other stuff. So she's an incredible activist, and she sat us down and she talked with us about reproductive justice. And there are 2 points I want to hammer home during this little talk. And the first is, what is reproductive justice? It's a term we sort of used a lot at NARAL, but what does that actually mean? A lot of people think abortion rights, it's very simple, right? It's like you're either pro-choice or you're not. And it's like this dichotomy. But Jasmine sort of exposed me to this mindset that it's much more complicated than that. And that's because reproductive justice isn't just pro or anti-choice. It's about analyzing women's reproductive freedom through the lens of gender, race, class, sexual orientation, and all of these identity categories. And if anyone here has ever taken a class on social sciences at Brandeis, you'll know of the term intersectionality. So reproductive justice is this intersectional focus to reproductive health. And so, for example, we think that the abortion fight is about having the right to choose abortion, and that can be true. It's based on legal battles, but a lot of the time, where you live can determine whether or not you can access reproductive health care, how much money you make, your race can determine all of these things. And so that really changed the way I thought about reproductive health, because for the longest time I just assumed it was about our legal right to choose. But that being said, that was what really hammered home for me with Jasmine. But then there was another portion of her presentation that really struck me. And it's this idea that we have to be polite, or we have to be quiet or soft-spoken when we're talking about abortion because it's so contentious and so divisive. And she actually said this quote that I really enjoyed to sort of convince us not to be so quiet about the issue. She said, "Women have been oppressed in this nation for centuries. Women often ask men to give us back our voice. Well, I'm not asking for permission. I'm demanding it without apology." And so she sort of takes this idea that the fight for abortion access, we think it's sort of like this lofty argument that's debated in the courts and among oftentimes straight white men in politics. And for the most part it is, but she sort of wants to take this movement for reproductive justice and bring it back to the people, reminiscent of the civil rights movement or the feminist movement, and having people really get angry and fight because there's a stigma and culture of silence around abortion. People don't really like to talk about it, and when they do, they sort of shy away and say I fight for abortion. abortion rights, and it's really hard to articulate that. And so Jasmine sort of told us that we can't be so quiet about what we fight for. We have to share our stories of abortion, why we care about it, and we have to say what we fight for without apology, because otherwise we won't get anywhere. And like all great things, this battle and all others start with a story. So if we can share our stories of why we care so much about this issue, and if we can convince others to do the same, we'll have a real impact. And so Jasmine sort of helped me develop my voice in saying what I fight for, and she made me proud to be someone who supports reproductive justice and who fights for what I believe in that way. And so that was what I really took away from her, and it was an incredible experience that I had.